One moment you're scrolling through your phone, sipping a bottle of Coke on a comfy sofa. The next you find yourself standing in a muddy field surrounded by thatched roof huts and people in tattered woolen tunics. The putrid stench of human and animal waste assaults your nostrils. You've somehow been transported to 14th century England, the heart of the Dark Ages. Think you would survive 24 hours? Life in medieval Europe was nasty, brutish, and short. If you were lucky enough to survive infancy, you had maybe a 50% shot of living to 45. Disease ran rampant in cramped, filthy cities. Hygiene was abysmal. Most people never bathed. Fleas, lice, and bedbugs were ubiquitous companions. Famine struck with devastating regularity as crops failed year after year. The social hierarchy was rigid and unforgiving. As a peasant, you were essentially your lord's property, toiling in his fields from dawn to dusk. Step out of line and you might find yourself in the stocks or on the gallows. Justice was swift and merciless. Trials by combat or ordeal were common. If you couldn't defend yourself with a sword, you were out of luck. Warfare was a fact of life. If invading armies didn't get you, brutal civil wars might. The 100 Years' War between England and France ravaged the continent. Marauding mercenaries left trails of carnage. Chivalry, as we imagine it, rarely extended beyond songs and stories. As an outsider from the future, you'd face even greater challenges. Your modern mannerisms and language would instantly mark you as different, potentially even as a witch or heretic. Forget trying to explain germ theory or the heliocentric model, you'd be lucky to find anyone literate. And if you did fall ill or get injured, medieval medicine was more likely to kill than cure. To understand why life in the Dark Ages was so challenging, we need to delve into the societal structures that shaped everyday existence. The feudal system reigned supreme, a rigid hierarchy that determined your place from birth to death. At the top sat the king and nobility who owned vast swaths of land. Below them were the knights bound by oaths of loyalty to their lords, and at the very bottom, the peasants or serfs. Serfdom was a form of indentured servitude that tied peasants to the land they worked. You were born into it, and there was little chance of escape. As a serf, you owed your lord labor, taxes, and a cut of your crops. In return, you got a small plot of land and the dubious privilege of not starving. Most of the time, anyway. It was a precarious existence, at the mercy of your lord's whims and the vagaries of weather and disease. Contrast that with modern socioeconomic structures where social mobility is at least theoretically possible. Today, education and hard work can help you climb the ladder. In the Dark Ages, education was a luxury reserved for the wealthy and the clergy. Most peasants were illiterate, and even among the upper classes, reading and writing were rare skills. Language itself was a barrier. The nobility spoke French, the language of the Norman conquerors. The church conducted its business in Latin. And the commoners? They spoke Middle English, a Germanic tongue that would be barely recognizable to modern ears. Even if you did learn to read and write, what then? The vast majority of books were religious texts or chronicles of the deeds of great men. Practical knowledge was passed down orally from master to apprentice, parent to child. The church was the one institution that cut across all levels of society. It offered a modicum of education and the promise of salvation in the afterlife. But it also wielded enormous power over daily life. The church controlled the calendar, dictating holy days and fast days. It set the moral tone, defining what was sinful and what was virtuous. And it had a monopoly on the mechanisms of justice, from trial by ordeal to excommunication. The church's influence extended to the realm of science and medicine as well. The prevailing belief was that illness was a punishment from God to be treated with prayer and penance. Monks and nuns provided what passed for healthcare, but their methods were often more harmful than helpful. Bloodletting, for example, was a common treatment for everything from headaches to the plague. Herbal remedies were also popular, but the line between medicine and magic was blurry at best. folk healers and wise women risked being accused of witchcraft if their cures didn't work, or sometimes even if they did. The church frowned upon anything that smacked of paganism or superstition, even as it promoted the veneration of saints and relics. This was the world you would find yourself in if you were suddenly transported to the Dark Ages. A world where your social status was fixed at birth, where education was a pipe dream, and where the church had its fingers in every aspect of life. A world where medical care was more likely to kill you than cure you, and where folk wisdom and religious dogma held sway over science and reason. It's a far cry from the freedoms and opportunities we take for granted in the modern age. We can choose our careers, our partners, our beliefs. We have access to education, healthcare, and a standard of living that would have been unimaginable to the average medieval peasant. But to truly appreciate how far we've come, it's important to understand where we started. The Dark Ages were called dark for a reason. Life was harsh, brutish, and often short. But it was also a time of great change and upheaval, a crucible that forged the modern world we know today. To survive in that world, you would need more than just luck or pluck. You would need a deep understanding of the forces that shaped society, from the feudal system to the church to the very language you spoke. Without that understanding, you would be lost, a stranger in a strange land, adrift in a sea of unfamiliar customs and beliefs. And even with it, your chances of thriving would be slim. The Dark Ages were not a time for the faint of heart or the ill-prepared. They were a time of hardship and struggle, of constant danger and uncertainty. But they were also a time of great resilience and ingenuity. The people of the Dark Ages faced challenges that would break most of us today. And yet they persevered, building cathedrals and castles, creating art and literature, and laying the foundations for the world we know today. Their stories are a testament to the enduring human spirit, to our ability to adapt and overcome even the darkest of times. So as we explore what life was really like in the Dark Ages, keep that in mind. Approach the past not with judgment or condescension, but with empathy and respect. Try to understand the forces that shaped that world and the people who lived in it. And remember that for all our modern advantages, we are not so different from our medieval ancestors. We too face challenges and uncertainties. We too struggle and strive and hope for a better future. What would it really be like to live in the Dark Ages? Let's start with the most fundamental aspect, staying alive. In the 14th century, life expectancy at birth hovered around 30 years. If you made it to adulthood, you might live to see 45 or 50, but getting there was no easy feat. Infant mortality was staggeringly high. In some areas, as many as half of all children died before their 5th birthday. Disease was a constant specter. Measles, tuberculosis, dysentery, and typhoid fever cut swathes through the population. And then there was the Black Death, the plague that wiped out a third of Europe in just a few years. Even if you dodged the disease bullet, malnutrition was a constant threat. The average peasant's diet was heavy on grains and light on pretty much everything else. Meat was a luxury, and fresh fruits and vegetables were scarce. This lack of nutrition left people vulnerable to a host of illnesses and infections. For women, the perils were even greater. Childbirth was a leading cause of death for women in their prime. With no understanding of hygiene or obstetrics, complications were common and often fatal. Those who survived might be left with debilitating injuries. And what recourse did you have if you found yourself on the wrong side of the law? Not much. Medieval justice was swift and brutal. Petty crimes like theft could earn you a public flogging or time in the stocks. More serious offenses might result in mutilation or execution. Trial by ordeal was a common method of determining guilt. The accused might be forced to grasp a red-hot iron or plunge their arm into boiling water. If their wounds healed cleanly, they were innocent. If not, well, let's just say the punishment was usually far worse than the crime. And then there was the constant specter of war. As a peasant, you were obligated to fight for your lord when called upon. Never mind that you had no training, no armor, and weapons that amounted to little more than farm tools. You were cannon fodder sent to the front lines to absorb the enemy's arrows and swords. The scale of warfare in the Middle Ages is hard to fathom. The 100 Years' War between England and France dragged on for generations. Entire regions were laid waste, crops burned, livestock slaughtered. Even if you survived the battles, you might starve in the aftermath. But perhaps the greatest challenge of living in the Dark Ages was the sheer unpredictability of it all. No matter your station, no matter your wealth or status, disaster could strike at any moment. A failed harvest, a sudden illness, a shift in political fortunes, any of these could upend your life in an instant. In the face of such constant uncertainty, people clung to what they knew. They found solace in religion, in the rhythm of the church calendar, in the promise of salvation after death. They leaned on their communities, their families, their feudal bonds. But for you, a time traveler from the future, those bonds would be meaningless. You would be alone, adrift in a world that was not your own. Your modern sensibilities, your knowledge of science and medicine and human rights would be worse than useless. They would mark you as an outsider, a threat to the established order. How long could you last in such a world? A day, a week, a month? It's impossible to say. But one thing is certain, the Dark Ages would test you in ways you can scarcely imagine. They would push you to the very limits of your endurance, physical and mental, and if you did survive, if by some miracle you managed to carve out a life in that harsh and unforgiving time, you would be changed by it. You would carry the scars, visible and invisible. You would know in a way that no modern person can, the true meaning of hardship and resilience. But you would also know something else, something that we in our comfortable 21st century lives often forget. You would know the fierce joy of survival against all odds. You would know the unbreakable bonds of community and shared struggle. You would know what it means to live each day as if it might be your last, because it very well could be. The Dark Ages were not a romantic time, not by any stretch of the imagination. They were a time of brutality and hardship, of suffering on a scale that is hard for us to comprehend. But they were also a time of great courage and resilience, of ordinary people facing extraordinary challenges with grit and determination. Perhaps the question is not whether you could survive in the Dark Ages, but whether you could truly live. Could you find meaning and purpose in a world so different from your own? Could you forge bonds of love and loyalty that would sustain you through the darkest of times? Could you look death in the face and still find the strength to carry on? These are not idle questions. They cut to the very heart of what it means to be human, of what we are capable of when pushed to our limits. The Dark Ages may be long gone, but the lessons they teach us are as relevant today as they ever were. For in the end, we are all time travelers of a sort. We are all navigating our way through an uncertain world, facing challenges and obstacles that can seem insurmountable at times, and like our medieval ancestors, we have a choice in how we face those challenges. We can succumb to despair and hopelessness, or we can find the courage to keep going, to lean on each other and on the enduring strength of the human spirit. We can let the darkness consume us, or we can light a candle against the night. The choice is ours, as it has always been, and though the path may be long and the journey hard, we know that others have walked it before us. They have faced the same fears, the same doubts, and they have emerged on the other side, changed perhaps, but unbroken. So learn from their example. Honor their memory by facing your own challenges with the same courage and determination. And never forget that even in the darkest of times, there is always hope, always the possibility of a brighter tomorrow. The Dark Ages may have been a time of great suffering, but they were also a time of great heroism. And in that heroism, we may just find the inspiration we need to face the trials of our own time and emerge stronger for it. The Dark Ages may seem like a distant, alien world, but the challenges people faced then are not so different from the ones we grapple with today. Take health, for instance. We may have advanced medical technology and a better understanding of hygiene, but we still face pandemics, chronic diseases, and disparities in access to healthcare. In fact, some of our current public health policies have their roots in medieval times. The Black Death, which devastated Europe in the 14th century, led to the development of quarantine measures and the idea of isolating the sick to prevent the spread of disease. These concepts remain cornerstones of our response to infectious outbreaks from the Spanish flu to COVID-19. Similarly, our modern legal system, with its emphasis on due process and the presumption of innocence, owes much to the evolution of medieval justice. Trial by jury, for example, emerged as an alternative to trial by ordeal, which relied on divine intervention to determine guilt or innocence. The Magna Carta, signed in 1215, established the principle that no one, not even the king, was above the law. These ideas laid the foundation for the rule of law and the protection of individual rights. But perhaps the most striking parallel between the Dark Ages and our own time is the issue of social inequality. The rigid hierarchy of the feudal system, with its stark divide between nobles and serfs, may seem antiquated. But the concentration of wealth and power in the hands of a few, the struggle for upward mobility, and the sense of being trapped by one's circumstances, these are all too familiar to many people today. Understanding the roots of these inequalities and how they were justified and maintained in the past can inform our current debates about wealth distribution, social justice, and the meaning of the American dream. It can help us see that the challenges we face are not new and that throughout history people have fought for a more equitable and just society. In the end, the Dark Ages were a time of both great suffering and great resilience. The people of that era faced challenges that would be unimaginable to most of us today. Constant threat of disease, hunger, violence, and oppression. They lived in a world where life was precarious, where death was always just a breath away. But they also lived in a world of great beauty and creativity where the human spirit shone through in the face of incredible adversity. They built soaring cathedrals and breathtaking works of art. They told stories and sang songs that still resonate with us today. They formed tight-knit communities and found joy in the simple pleasures of life. And though their world was very different from our own, the fundamental human experiences that shaped their lives, love, loss, hope, fear, courage, compassion, are the same ones that shape ours. By studying their stories, we can gain a deeper understanding not just of the past, but of ourselves. We can learn from their mistakes and their triumphs. We can find inspiration in their resilience and their humanity. And we can gain a greater appreciation for the progress we've made while also recognizing the work that still needs to be done. For though we may have come a long way from the Dark Ages, we still face many of the same challenges: inequality, disease, violence, oppression. And just like our medieval ancestors, we have a choice in how we face those challenges. We can give in to despair and division, or we can come together in hope and solidarity. We can learn from the past, and we can dream of a better future. We can recognize that though the path may be long and the journey hard, it is a path that others have walked before us. And with courage, compassion, and a commitment to justice, it is a path we can walk together. So honor the memory of those who came before us and work to build a world that is worthy of their sacrifices. A world where every person has the chance to live with dignity, with purpose, and with hope. A world where the light of human goodness shines through even in the darkest of times. That is the legacy of the Dark Ages, and it is a legacy that we carry with us still. May we never forget it, and may we always strive to live up to its example. By exploring the Dark Ages and the lessons they hold, we gain not just knowledge, but wisdom. Wisdom about the human condition, about the resilience of the spirit, about the cyclical nature of history. It's a wisdom that can guide us as we navigate the challenges of our own time. Dark Ages may be a distant memory, but their echoes still resonate today. In the struggles and triumphs of our medieval ancestors, we see a reflection of our own humanity. We see the enduring power of the human spirit to overcome adversity, to find meaning and beauty in the face of suffering, to build a better world for those who come after us. That is the true legacy of the Dark Ages. Not just a time of darkness and despair, but a testament to the indomitable will of the human spirit. A reminder that even in the darkest of times, there is always hope, always the possibility of a brighter tomorrow. So let us carry that legacy forward. Let us face the challenges of our own time with the same courage, resilience, and determination that our ancestors showed in the face of unimaginable hardship. Let us honor their memory by striving to build a world that is more just, more compassionate, more humane. For in the end, that is what history teaches us, that the human spirit is stronger than any obstacle, any adversity, that together we can overcome anything, and that even in the darkest of times, the light of human goodness will always shine through.